Okay, thank you everyone who came here to see about microprofile. I have a question to you. Have you heard about microprofile before? Or you just came here because you're curious to know more about it? Have you heard about microprofile? No? Okay, so that's my purpose. I'm here because a lot of people don't know what is microprofile, and I'm here to talk to you what is it. I'm not trying to sell saying that microprofile is best than that other framework. I'm not trying to compare saying that this is the best than that, or I'm just here to show what is microprofile and how it can help you, especially when you're working in a company that likes to have specification. Okay, so by the way, for you to know the importance of microprofile, just won the Duke's Choice Award. Okay, and all the slides that I will use here, they are all available for free in this link. So you can think it like open source slides. You can just grab it, and if you like it, you can share with your friends, with your work colleagues. That's it. My name is Rafael. I work at Red Hat for 9 years. I started there as a consultant. Then I became a software engineer, and now I work as director of developer experience. What does it mean? It means that I come here to conference just like this, just like Devoxx, talk to you developers, understand what you need, what you like, what you don't like, return to Red Hat and say, Red Hat, this is what developers want. And Red Hat produces what developers want, and then I return to conference and say, this is what Red Hat has for developers. And one way to communicate with developers is through the developers program. So if you go to this website, developers.redhat.com, and register yourself, I promise you that we will not spam, we will not say, send you an email every day. It will be just like once a month, saying, okay, this is the cool things that we have, come check. So that's why you need to register. And once that you register at developers.redhat.com, you will have access, free access to ebooks like this one, Building Reactive Microservices in Java, or Microservices for Java Developers. They are all free, you just need to register. Or Migrating Microservice Database from Edson Yanaga. Edson was here last Devoxx. We have also introducing Istio Service Mesh for microservice. There is a talk today about Istio 2 p.m. Okay, so let's start. What is Eclipse Microprofile? Microprofile is, just like it says here, it's an open source community specification. That's why I said to you, if you work in a company that like to have specification, Microprofile is for that company, is for you, because it's all about a specification. It's a paper that many vendors will implement. It's made by a community of individuals, organizations, and vendors, okay? And as I said, because it's a paper, because it's a specification, we have, among these individuals and organizations and vendors, different microprofile implementations. The one that I will use today for this talk is Thorntail. Thorntail used to be called WildFly Swarm, but they changed the name to Thorntail. The name WildFly Swarm came because it was based on WildFly Application Server, which was the JBoss application server. They renamed it to WildFly. And now WildFly Swarm became Thorntail. Okay, and just for you to know about it, this is the website of Thorntail. This is the implementation that I will use for this demo today. Okay, so how it started? There was a moment in time that, of course, you all know about Java EE, right? Java EE is very famous. It's a specification, maintained by the community, and then we had several vendors that implemented Java EE. But there was a moment that the community realized that Java EE was not enough for this new world. And what I say about this new world, this cloud native applications world. People are now trying to create cloud native applications using, of course, different technologies, but Java EE was not enough. So they decided to start a new implementation in a community way so they could move faster and not depend on years and years of discussion about Java EE. And then 2 years ago, during Java 1, they released the first implementation. They called it Microprofile 1.0. That's really simple. They just got the CDI specification, JSON P specification, and JAX-RS specification, and they released it as Microprofile 1.0. So it's really simple. It's a way to produce microservices. To produce microservice, what you need? CDI to give you context and dependence injection, JSON for the communication, and JAX-RS for the REST communication. Really simple. But 1 year after, almost 1 year after, they decided to come with a new API called config that was introduced 1 year after, because during this year, a lot of things happened. Once that it was released, it got a lot of attraction, and then they moved the specification to the Eclipse Foundation. So they mounted the infrastructure, the communication, the groups, the work groups, and then finally they started moving and discussing things inside the Eclipse Foundation. So that's why in 1 year they released this new API. So what I will do now, so you can understand what microprofile is to go through each new things. I will not focus on things that are part of Java EE, because you all know Java EE. But I will focus on new things, just like this config API. So what is config API? Well, every application needs configuration, right? And we need to keep different configurations dependent on the environment. From the development environment, from the production environment, we need to change that. Sometimes we even need, if we have an application running on production, we need to change a configuration, right? Like to enable a feature, a test feature on production. Of course, that's not always recommended, but we can have some kind of feature toggles with configuration. So this specification is how to configure application, and it's really simple. It uses CDI, so you just have an annotation called config property that allows you to consume that value from different providers. So we have different providers. You can specify that value using system properties, or you can specify using environment variables, or even inside a config file called microprofile config properties. Of course, you have different levels of priorities. Of course, because you can define something that's inside your application. Microprofile config.properties. This is the default. But suppose that you want to overwrite it, you can create an environment variable. But suppose that only admins can create environment variables. But even so, when you are running your application, you can use java-d to overwrite. So that's why you have these priorities. And of course, you can create your own config source. So suppose that you want a config source to come from, let's say, come from a database, come from another file. You can implement and place your config source with different ordinals on your library. Okay? And how you can use it? You just use the annotation config property and the name of the property. Of course, if the API could not find the value, you can specify a default value. I have an example here. I've built 3 microservices, microservice A, B, and C, and A needs to communicate with B, that needs to communicate with C. So to get the address of the microservice B, I use a config, just like here. Let me show another example. So imagine here that you need to get to build a new client. So you can use, again, CDI with configuration and provide values like the name, the host, and the port, just using the annotation config property. And that will be part of the client that you are building or producing. Another way to use this API, oops, we lost video, so let's see what's, okay. I still have video here, because it makes sense for you to see. Okay. Perfect. Let's continue. There we go. Another thing that you can do is use CDI to inject the config object. Because with the config object, you have different methods. Like, for example, let me see if I forgot to sacrifice Windows Millennium CDs to praise the demo god, so now, okay, now we have network also. So we can have use the config object to get the properties that we have available to configure. We can get the config sources to know who is providing those configurations to my application. And also, of course, use config to get value. Of course, most people don't use config get value because you have this way to configure your application. Use the config property annotation. Okay? So that was part of microprofile 1.1. Then you can see that just 1 month later, from August 2017 to September 2017, they released 4 new APIs. They updated the config API, but they released health check, metrics, fault tolerance, and JWT propagation. So let's see what they are about. Health check. Well, every application needs to know their health status. For example, if you are running your application in a Kubernetes cluster, Kubernetes needs to know if your application is healthy. Because if it's not healthy, it will kill your container and create a new one, right? Or if it's not live or ready, it will avoid sending requests to your application. So it's really good to have a way, a standard way between all microservices to know how is the health of your application. By the way, for every API that I'm talking now, there is a link here to the project that specifies this API. So the goal of health check is create a compatibility with the most well-known cloud platforms. It's appropriated for machine-to-machine communication. But, of course, it should provide a way for us, human, open the page and see, is my application healthy? It's not for us, but it should be understandable. So how can I create a health check? So it's really simple. I implement the health check interface. It has a method call that you can do anything that you want and create a response. is my service up or is my service down? It's simple like that. So I have here, as I said, my microservice A, my microservice B, and my microservice C. So let's start them and also show you a health check implementation. So my microservice A is called customer. That will call my microservice B called preference. For my service A to be healthy, because it depends on microservice B, I need to be able to communicate with my service B, right? So what I will do here, I try to communicate. Look here, I'm using the config property to get the address and the port of my microservice B. I try to communicate. If I was able to communicate with no exception, my service is up. Otherwise, I can say that my service is down, and I can add the calls here. So let's see that. Let's open here the page. Okay, my service is up. And I also tried my service B, my service B called preference is also up. So let's stop here one microservice. I will start microservice B, okay? Now if I try the health of microservice A, it will see, no, your service is down. I could not communicate because preference is down. The cause is connection refused. Okay, so this is a really simple way to implement a health check. And of course, as you saw here, I can add outcomes to my check. So I cannot only say that my service is up or down, but suppose that I have a list that allows only 10 subscribers. I can return, for example, that I have actually 3 subscribers, and that will give me an idea, is my service close to get unhealthy because it's almost full? So that's something that you also can do with this API. Okay, we have also metrics. Metrics is different from health check because the purpose of metrics is to be an alternative for JMX, right? With JMX, we can have information about the thread, memory, a lot of things, but it's only for the JVM. And because we are talking about microservices, we need to have a standard way, a polyglot way. So the difference is, with health check, you can just say, is my service healthy? Yes or no response. But with metric, I can collect long-term data for capacity planning. And while in health, the question is my application still running? With metric, I can proactively discover issues. Is my disk growing? Is my memory going? Is my memory reduced? So, as I said, for metrics, I can have different values coming for general purpose, like used heap memory, committed heap memory, max heap memory, or about class loading, about the operation system, like the CPU, system load, or even the thread. And I have 3 different kinds of information. The basic one, the base, with all microprofile vendors must provide, okay. We have different metrics based by vendors. So we saw that we can have different vendors implementing microprofile. So they are optional. And you can create your own metric. So let's see all metrics here in this endpoint. So if we open this page, /metrics, we will see the base, we'll see vendor 1, and let me see if I can have application here. No, we don't have application. Let me, yeah, I have a loop here. Okay. If I go to /base, I can see all the base metrics, vendor, and application. No, do I have application? Yeah, I have application. So application here is the recommendation count, right? So every time that I access my microservice called recommendation, my counter is increasing. Let me. So I can have metrics on top of my application. And this is really simple. How can I create a metric for example, for recommendation? I just place a notation here. I want to count. This value will be counted. Name, recommendation call, count. Oops. Description, number of times recommendation is requested. So that's what is here. Number of times recommendation is requested. Okay, so what I use it counted for that method. It's a counter. It counts the invocations of the annotated object. But I can use a gauge. I can use a method. I can use metric. Method is how many requests per second. Timed. How long does it take to execute that object? So you can create different metrics for your application and also consume the metrics from the JVM, from the class loader, from the thread pool. Okay, so that's the purpose of metrics. We have another API released in the microprofile 1.2, which is the fault tolerance. So because we are communicating, we have a distributed system. We are communicating from microservice A to microservice B. We know that it's a principle of microservice that you will fail. Eventually, you will fail. You will face a failure. Okay? So you need to be prepared for that failure. And some ways to be prepared is use retries. Okay. So suppose that you try to communicate, the service is not online. You will retry that communication. You can have bulkheads to avoid a lot of requests to flood your microservice, or you can have circuit breakers to fail fast. If you try to communicate, it tries, it's not online, then you provide a fast failure. So it's really simple to use fault tolerance in microprofile. We have different API annotations for that. You can annotate your call with timeout. So we will define a timeout. If the microservice doesn't reply in 1 second, just provide an exception, time it out. With a single annotation, you don't need to manually write a code for that. To retry, you can just use the annotation retry. The fallback will provide an alternative solution. If this microservice is not available, what other method should I call? Bulkhead or circuit breaker. Here we have an example. By the way, I really like the fallback implementation. So for example, if you try to find the author by email, you will call the remote service. If there is an exception coming from the remote service, you can fall back to the default author. So you can create a JSON object that will return the default author. Of course, that depends on the business scenario, but you can create different fallbacks. Okay, retry, max number of retries, 5. Circuit breaker, that uses a timed window. So during 2 seconds, if it fails more than 60% of the time, then open the circuit. Okay, and timeout 800 milliseconds. So it's really simple to use. I've used that in my demo here. Let me see. preference endpoint. Yeah, it will retry. If it doesn't work, the fallback that will be called is fallback. That only responds fallback method. Okay, JWT propagation. It's a way to provide security information between microservices. When I started to study about JWT, I thought that JWT would be like something like a Java technology, because every Java technology starts with J, right? JPA, JTA, JSF, we have JUnit, like the tools. But JWT is JSON Web Token. So when I started to study JWT, I realized that it's not related to Java, but it's related to JSON, because even there is a standard for that. It creates a JSON object, just like this, that you have several fields, like who is the issuer, the expiration date, the user, the groups that the JSON is part of. We even have a website called JWT.io that provides JSON example here, that if you decode that, it will provide the algorithm, the type, all the payload here, the sub, the name. So the purpose of this specification is propagate between the calls, right? And also, just like you had in Java EE, you can declare the roles, deny all requests for the whole class, but allow only who has the role admin and user to invoke this method. So it's a simple way to get JWT, because it's a standard, right? And get those roles information. You can also use this method, get user roles from the user principal to get a list of users, of roles. So, and of course, get the token itself. Then, for microprofile 1.3, they release open tracing, open API, and REST client. They updated metrics and config. And let's see what's open API about. So I guess that most of you have heard about Swagger. Swagger, it's very famous for specifying REST endpoints. And everything that is once famous, they very likely become a standard, right? So with Open API, it was not different. They created a standard, and it's really simple to define Open API. You have an annotation, just like you have here. Let me show me the code. Showing the codes, I prefer to use it than. So let me see here, customer endpoint. Yeah, for my customer microservice, I used the annotation Open API definition, title, customer service, description. I have the contact here. For my endpoint, I also annotated the operation, the API response, get customer preference and recommendation. The tag here, customer service. So I just annotated, I documented my microservice. And now what? Now that I've used these annotations here, tag, operation, API response, I can, for example, open Swagger. And because there is an endpoint here called localhost 8080/open API that will return this file here, okay, that has all that information. Customer service, this is the customer microservice, who is the developer contact. I have one service here, that's the customer service, that gets also preference and recommendation. What are the response? So I can get this URL and also open it in Swagger. And, oops, HTTP/ okay. And visualize that in a better way. So this is the host that I consume the service. This is my information about the developer. I have the service here. And I can even try my microservice here. Okay, so let me. It's text plain. Oops. I think it's HTTP, yes. HTTP, yes. So that gives me the information about it documents my API. Here at Swagger, let me see. Here? I'm not sure if an open API specifies that, so let me take a look. Because Swagger allows that. So the question is, can I generate the model from the specification? Because Swagger allows you to, once that you define your microservice, it can generate the client that will access that information. Swagger allows that, but let's see if OpenAPI allows it as well. If I'm not wrong, it allows. So version, format, document, structure, schema. Well, I need to look at that, but my suggestion is, well, because OpenAPI specification is maintained by Swagger, as you can see here, very likely it will have, or not as part of the specification, but it can be like a part of an extension provided by Swagger. And you can see here that even the Swagger UI was able to read the OpenAPI. Of course, the version that I'm using here is outdated. So when I try to execute, it will give me an error because it tries HTTPS, not HTTP. But I should fix that in the. So that's why when I invoke here, I changed two things: the protocol and the header to accept text plain. Okay. So OpenAPI, a standard to document your API. REST client is really nice because, again, we need to communicate from service A to service B. So there is a type-safe approach, which is you create an interface, then you can use your REST client builder, give the URL, and then build the interface. And now you can use the proxy created by the interface to call your method. That was shown here because I'm in the customer microservice. I have an interface. I use the JAX-RS call notation. And then in my endpoint, I can do just like this. Preference service, which is an interface. Comes from REST client builder, new builder. Use the URL that came from the configuration, right here. I can register exception wrappers. So what happens if exception happens in this invocation? And then I build the interface. Now it's really easy to call my method. I can use the preference service, and I only have the get preference. There's also open tracing. Open tracing is really cool because sometimes when you have different paths of invocation, A calls B, then B calls F, F calls G, you need to understand where your requests are going, why it's taking so long. So open tracing, it's another standard for distributed tracing. We have different implementations for open tracing, but the one that I'm using here is Jagger. The first one that I've used was Zipkin, mostly because Zipkin was one of the first. It came from Twitter. But now, because I'm trying to be as close as possible to specification, I started using Jagger. So with open tracing, it's really, really simple. You just annotate your method as traced and the name of the operation. And that will create a graphic for you with the invocation and the times consumed. So you can see that in the demo. This method here, it's traced. Let me see another method here. Preference and endpoint. This is also traced. So let me open Jagger. Yeah. All the responses will be available here, and you can consume. So the different implementations and the different calls are available here. Something that's not being presented in my Jagger console is the call from customer to preference to recommendation. This is a bug from the REST client, because the REST client should propagate the call, the traced span, but there is a bug in this version that it's not propagating. So don't consider my demo. Consider the slide here where you can see that you can have a graphic that from this service you called this other operation, then you called this other, and so on. So this is the purpose of open tracing. And finally, now in June of this year, they released Microprofile 1.4. There are no new APIs. They just updated the versions of open tracing, fault tolerance, REST client, propagation, and config. People seem to like a lot about config because it was updated 3 times since the release. 1.1, 1.2, and 3. Basically, every time that they release a new version of Microprofile, they update config. And at the same day that they released 1.4, they also released Microprofile 2.0. So what's the purpose of 2.0? You can see here that they didn't create anything new also. The purpose of Microprofile 2.0 was to align those APIs, the base APIs, CDI, JSON, JAX-RS, and JSON-B, to Java EE 8. So the only difference between Microprofile 1.4 and Microprofile 2.0 is that Microprofile 1.0 was based on Java EE 7, and Microprofile 2.0 was based on Java EE 8. And of course, that was represented on the API, CDI, JSON-P, JAX-RS, and JSON. And last month, in October, they released 2.1. 2.1 was just the update of open tracing. Okay. What will come for microprofile 2.2? That might be a question. So it's scheduled for February of 2019, and they plan to release reactive messaging and reactive operators. So everything seems to be going to reactive. So what is being under discussion at this moment are long-running actions. As I said, reactive streams and events, data access, event data, service meshes, and concurrency. So most people ask, I saw different implementations, but microprofile doesn't tell me how to manage my data. It's because as each microservice can have your own data or your own data store. Some are using NoSQL. At this moment, there are certain groups that are discussing the specification of NoSQL database. So that's why data access is a topic that will eventually come to microprofile. The demo that I've used here is at this URL, github.com/redhatdevelopersdemos/microprofile-demo. If you go there, you'll see the 3 microservices that I've used: customer, preference, and recommendation. I recently updated to Torntail 2.1, but I still have a lot of things to do. Like I said, I have to fix Jagger. I have to implement all the new APIs that are coming. And the reason that I'm showing this URL to you is because I want to invite you to also try those microservices and probably work as a community, providing things. For example, you can fork, you can try a new API, something that worked for fixing things, just send back a pull request. I'll be really happy to see that, to receive a pull request from you. I have placed here also some links how you can get involved with microprofile. There is the Google groups where people, developers and people that are working the specification are discussing. There's a link for microprofile projects, the schedule for the meetings, the YouTube channel, and Hangouts for the community. And if you have any further question related to microprofile, I'll be very glad to help you. This is my Twitter handle, @RafaBene. Usually, this is the best way to reach me. So thank you so much. Okay. And we have a moment for question and answers. Okay, so the question is there any dashboard for just like Grafana? Yeah. Okay, if there is dashboards that expose metrics for
example, all JVM exposing metrics in one dashboard in Grafana.
Okay. No, there is no dashboard yet. Probably some vendors will implement them on top of those metrics, but nothing specified. It can be just like something provided by the vendor.
Okay. Then another question. Does this microprofile framework have the complete set of metrics for anything? For example, for JVM or for Jetty server in one box.
Yeah, related to metrics. It has most of the metrics.
I saw that you can configure any metrics.
Yes.
But I am interested in do we have the set of complete metrics, for example, for Jetty?
There are metrics for basically almost everything. You can see here some examples of general metric, class loading, thread, operation system. And if there is no existing metrics that you are interested, you can create your own.
Okay.
Because the application can consume that metrics and then export using one of these APIs.
I saw, for example, I saw another framework named Micrometrics.
Mm-hmm.
And guys who made this framework deliver deliver a lot of different default sets, or default sets for different aims. For example, for Jetty, for
Open metrics.
JVM. Yeah.
Open metrics IO.
Where
Okay, it's part of the CNCF, Cloud Native Computing Foundation.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure how the metrics API from Microprofile is aligned to Open Metrics. I really don't know. But because it's part of CNCF, my belief is that there will be an update on the API to match. At least that, as a developer, is what I want to see. Because let's think. I guess that most of you are using Spring Boot, right?
Right.
And most things that you saw here already exist in Spring Boot. So the only reason to adopt Microprofile is because your company likes specification. So as closer to specification, then better you will feel comfortable to adopt certain things, because it's not part of a specific vendor. It's part of a community, it's open, it should evolve, you should be part of the process. So when I see things like this, I have the metrics from Microprofile, and I have open metrics from CNCF, my wish as a developer is that the Microprofile metrics become closer to CNCF, because CNCF is larger than just the Java community. So that's my desire as a developer. But I really don't know if that will happen or not. You're welcome.
Hello, I have one question. Does we have some tools monitoring for obtain this data? Maybe you know some kind of it, because I don't know.
Which kind of data?
For example, we could integrate something with this API and obtain this data like more user-friendly. Not this is like
just text-based?
Yes, not text-based. And for example, like a previous question about Grafana, maybe some other tools could take us possibility for update this data, obtain.
Okay,
or
but
make it more user-friendly.
But for any specific API, or are you saying data in general?
I mean, we have a lot of API for metrics base, for health, and if we would like to present it like more friendly, not like text.
Text, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think that they will, for example, for different use cases, for metrics, yeah, you mentioned here. For metrics, I can see only text, right? And I expect that the vendors will provide a graphic visualization. I think it's just a matter of time. we have also the health, right? Let me open here, health. This is a JSON format, and health is meant for machines. So they are just, but by the way, let me show something. If I go here, the services health, you can see that the result, let me open. Result is 200 for health. Now let me stop a service, and when I return the services down, it replies also an HTTP error 503. So this is more for machines. For example, Kubernetes will understand that the service is offline because when it tries to communicate with this URL, it gives an error, HTTP error. So health is not meant for humans, although you can read the values here. Okay, so I don't think that health will have a human readable interface. And for the output of a JSON or text return, that's only for the front end. So once that you build your front end, a JSON payload will be consumed and displayed on the front end. So different APIs have different ways to interact with humans.
I suppose the question about the third-party applications who can take these metrics and show the different graphics in more human view. For example, Prometheus or something like this.
Because it's very important for example, when we deliver our application to production, people who support it in production environment, they they maybe not have a lot of knowledge for use something like that, and maybe for them it's important to present this data more user-friendly because it's all about time reaction for problem.
Okay, I totally agree.
Yes.
Yeah. But the question is, how can we consume those metrics, right? Those metrics that we are seeing here in a console. Because I agree. The question, imagine that an admin will start working in a company that has a lot of microservices, and it's easy for them to just go to Prometheus and ask for a metric instead of going to this page and what I want to see. I want to see the, let me see, memory. So let me see here, memory. The memory used heap bytes gauge. So my guess is that there will be a way to consume that. It's not part of the specification, but eventually will appear something to cover that.
So I have a little bit provocation question about what is micro meaning in the micro profile. So it's just about size of distribution.
Okay, it's a good question.
Because let me try to explain. Because for example, we are using WildFly Application Server in our company, and so it's just enough about 100 megabytes. So it's like 10 photos on my mobile. So it's not too big. Why we need to micro profile?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, when you are building you said that you use WildFly. Yeah. And you have to start your WildFly server, right? And place your WAR file inside your application, inside your server, right? Yeah. And inside WildFly, you have support for AGBs, JSF.
I have a lot of metrics. I have a lot of
clustering.
I have everything what I need for the production.
Okay, yeah. And you have your application server that you can place a lot of applications inside, and usually they are not distributed. There's distributed computing.
Inside application server. It's about why we need to microprofile.
Okay, so the best answer that I can give you is because it's a specification that covers distributed communication between the applications. So everything that most things that you saw, it's meant to say I have a service A calling service B. With a monolith like a WildFly, just WildFly, I can replicate many servers, but all of them will have the entire application, right? I have the entire application here, then I replicate, I have the entire application here, then the entire application here. And because it's the entire application, I have everything. JSF, AJBs, JPA, JTA, clustering, security, everything that's provided by application servers. In this new world of microservices, people are not, for example, clustering is something that's not used anymore. They use, they use, for example, Kubernetes cluster, a cluster of containers. What else? They don't need to inflate your memory with JSF because your application just needs to provide the data for the front end to consume. They don't need distributed transactions because in a microservice world, people use sagas and compensation and sagas. So it's a different world that the Java world was based on Java EE was not prepared. Spring Boot, okay. Spring Boot's prepared. Spring Boot is one of the most adopted Java frameworks for microservices. People are now starting to use Vertex. There is also another talk about Vertex today. So the purpose is to have something lightweight. And let me also show you something here about Thorntail. Let me do a Maven clean here really quick. So I have just my source. When I do a Maven package, for example, instead of generating a WAR file, it will get the WAR file, use the Thorntail Maven plugin, and create a jar file that I can do, for example, java-jar target customer Thorntail jar. It placed your WAR file inside your jar. It created a fat jar to you. So you can place this jar file inside a container, and it has everything that you need. So when it's starting, it will see what fractions of WildFly it needs. It needs just microprofile health, microprofile JAXB, and microprofile JSONP. Everything else is not placed. I just got fractions, and now I have my entire server working inside a fat jar. So it reduces the memory consumption. It reduces the number of APIs. You can see that the Java EE 8 umbrella is really Java EE 8 umbrella. Yeah, Java EE 8 has a lot of, Java EE 8 has a lot of APIs, right? But microprofile is micro because it's focused only on the APIs that are needed for microservices. So for microservice, I don't need JTA. I don't need web service. Most of the communications are REST-based or messaging. I don't need JSP. I don't need managed beans. I don't need WebSocket. I don't need bean validation. Yep. That's true. But yeah, but the fact is, it's not only about the memory. It's the micro is not about the memory of the server, but it's about microservices in the context of cloud-native application. So, for example, in Java EE 8, you don't have anything about configuration, right? So that's part of microprofile. It was created because the community saw that they need something like just the Spring Boot config server. But the Spring Boot config server is not part of a specification. So what I said in the beginning here, microprofile is meant for companies and people who like a specification. Another thing, Java EE 8, there is no standard for metrics. Although every service, nobody specified. And now Java EE 8 became Jakarta EE. So my guess is that the Eclipse Foundation will move faster than the previous Java EE 8 process on JCP, Java Community Process. Another things that are part of microprofile. REST client. Oh no, there's a REST client on Jakarta 2.0, but what else? JWT. JWT is not part. So everything that's based for, it's mostly used for building microservices is now part of a specification. And as I said, again, all those things that I talked here, they exist in a Spring Boot. So one of the first things that I said as well is I'm not trying to say, use microprofile. It's better than this or better than that. If you are using Spring Boot, that's fine. If you are using Vertex, that's fine. But if your company wants a specification, most companies feel safer, you can adopt something that's created by the community. But if you are satisfied on what you have now, perfect, that's fine. I just want you to know that there are choices. Microprofile is not from Red Hat, although Red Hat is collaborating with Microprofile. So I'm not here trying to sell adopt Microprofile. We don't make money with Microprofile on a sense that Thorntail is an open source and free project. We don't have yet a product that support microprofile. Eventually we will have, yes, but that's not what I'm trying to do here now, saying buy, use microprofile because Red Hat will make money on top of that. No, I'm just saying, if you like specification, take a look. It was an innovative project. It won the Duke Choice Award. There are several vendors, as one of these slides here. Yes. So eventually, you can choose different implementations. And what I've seen is that companies that like specification is because they want to move from one server to another and keep the same application. Does that answer your question? I know that I answered more than you asked, but it's just because I thought that it is an opportunity to discuss things related to the future and the strategy and why I'm here talking about microprofile and not talking about Istio, serverless, or other cool things as well. Questions? I really don't know the answer if I can use microprofile with Drop Wizard. That was your question, right? Yeah, I really don't know because I've used Drop Wizard only once. It was like 2 years ago. I don't even remember how Drop Wizard. I know that it was one of the first fat jars implementations, but since I've never used it in these last 2 years, and I used it only once to do a hello world, I don't know. Thank you.
Is it possible to use with annotations communication with services, with discovering, or it's not supported by this specification?
Okay, so related to other things, I have a nice slide here that I use for when I'm talking about the Istio. Let me show you Istio on Kubernetes. Are you familiar with Kubernetes, right?
Yes.
Okay.
With Spring Boot.
Using Spring Boot.
Netflix stack.
In Netflix OSS. So I'm using the time that I have here to open a parenthesis because this is a really nice discussion. Every microservice, no matter what language you are using, JavaScript, Go, Python, Vertex, Thorntail, WildFly, they all need to have a well-defined API, right? Then you need a way to discovery, service discovery. You need a way to invoke. Is it REST? Is it messaging? And you need elasticity, resilience, pipeline, how you will get that on production, authentication, login, monitoring, tracing. In the Netflix stack was called like microservice 1.0 because it was on the one of the first implementations. Let me see here. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, just a short history of microservice. You can see that in 2006 the cloud was born. Drop Wizard and Vertex became very famous in 2011 with the fat jars. Netflix went open source with Hystrix, Eureka, Ribbon, probably is what you use in 2012. And that created the perfect storm with Spring Boot, Kubernetes, Docker, and microservice was defined in the ThoughtWorks radar. So probably you use everything related to Netflix OSS. But what's wrong with Netflix OSS? It's Java only. And when we are talking about microservices, we are talking about a polyglot environment. I can and I should be able to use different technologies. That's the purpose of microservice. I can have a microservice A using Go with MySQL, the microservice B using Spring Boot with Postgres, microservice C using Python with NoSQL. So we should be able to do that. So when you add OpenShift and Kubernetes to that microservice capabilities, Kubernetes give you for free discovery, invocation, and elasticity. If you use OpenShift also, you will have monitoring, logging, and pipeline. OpenShift provides that for free to you. This talk is about Istio, and Istio provides tracing, discovery, resilience, and authentication. But what's the point? The point is that Netflix OSS was great, but now for 2018, you can substitute the Netflix OSS by Kubernetes, OpenShift, and Istio. There is a talk about Istio today. And also replace Zool, replace Hystrix, and have a polyglot microservice platform. So that now I'm lost. What the question was?
The question was about REST client because with OpenFagen, with Spring Boot, we can call our services through service discovery, and we don't need to specify hosts. We just specify name, and we can call our service.
Yeah,
with
using
REST client, how to do this? Is it possible or not?
Everything we are preaching. Why Kubernetes? I wrote a blog post called "Why Kubernetes is the New Application Server," where I go through each one of these things that I showed to you: service discovery, invocation, elasticity, to show that once that we use Kubernetes, we have everything that we need for free. So my point is, you can get this application and focus only on the business, while all those non-functional stuff will be provided not only by Netflix, because Netflix is only Java-based, but provided by Kubernetes. So with Kubernetes, you can have all those things that you had in Netflix OSS. For example, with Istio, you can have circuit breakers, you can have retry policies, chaos tests, chaos scenarios with fault injection. You can have everything else. So my point is, what I would do myself as a developer, I would get a microprofile implementation and run it on top of Istio, Kubernetes, and OpenShift stack. That's what I will do, because that's what CNCF also recommends. CNCF landscape. If we take a look here on the landscape of CNCF, we will see Kubernetes, Prometheus, Envoy, which is the proxy of Istio, Open Tracing. So I'll try to be as close as possible to this landscape of CNCF.
Okay. And one more question about configuration. I saw in your annotations a lot of constants for retries, timeouts, and so on. With Spring Boot and config server, we can define properties and refresh context and reload it. How to do it with microprofile? Is it possible to change it and reload dynamically, or?
Okay, great question. If we can change the configurations using the config API to change retries, timeouts, I'm not sure if that's part of the API, but my guess, since we are trying to get as close as possible also to what Spring Boot has, my guess that if it doesn't exist, probably and let me see the name of the in the fault tolerance 1.2, 1.3, there should be. Okay, but I really don't know if this is possible today or not. Okay. Okay, so we are at the end of our talk. We have people arriving for the next talk. Once more, thank you so much.